Okay, let's get started actually. And I'm sure there will be a number of people who will join as this event progresses. But hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nidhi Gandhi and I'm the Curatorial and Programs Associate at the San Jose Museum of Art. And we're thrilled today to be hosting this virtual conversation led by the Tea Project, which is consists of the artists Aaron Hughes and Amber Ginsburg, as well as activists, advocates, educators, creatives, Tanya and Mohamedou, who are joining us today to speak about the Tea Project's Remaking the Exceptional podcast and their experiences with incarceration and as torture survivors, both in the United States and about the global conditions of these issues. Um, we're really excited to go into a little more depth about the Remaking the Exceptional podcast. We're also going to be sharing some imagery. We're going to be sharing a lot of really heartfelt conversations. And we're really excited to bring you along for this journey. One thing I wanted to note is that we've been partnering with San Jose State University's radio, KSJS 90.5 FM, to be broadcasting the podcast throughout the summer. And we will be broadcasting the podcast in the fall as well. So stay tuned for that information. I also wanted to share that we do have, if you are coming to us from San Jose or from the Bay Area, a lot of in-person programming as well, including First Friday, this Friday, and our partner on the Seeing Through Stone exhibition, which the Tea Project's artwork is in. The Institute of the Arts and Sciences at UC Santa Cruz is having several performances this Friday evening. So we would love to see you at those in-person events. Lastly, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you could please keep yourselves muted throughout the conversation between our four speakers, we would very much appreciate that. But please do feel free to share your video if you feel comfortable. We are live streaming this to YouTube, and the recording will be available via YouTube afterwards. So I wanted to disclose that. There will also be an opportunity to ask questions to our speakers. If you, as you have questions occur to you, can drop your questions in the chat. We would love to see them pop up, and I will ask the speakers your questions at the end. So with all of that said, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron and Amber to do a little bit of introduction and to lead the conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, Nidhi. And also, I just want to do a shout out to our collaborators on the Ode to the Sea installation. That's a part of the exhibition. That's Khalid Kasim, Galip Al-Bahani, and Muath Alawawi. Khalid and Muath are still extra-legally imprisoned in Guantanamo. And we also want to start off by just acknowledging that this is a really hard moment, that our thoughts are with everyone in Lebanon and in Gaza and everyone living underneath the threat of violence. The genocidal violence of this moment highlights the need for the kind of connections and solidarity that this project has been about. If you want to go to the next slide, we wanted to start with a quote by Angela Davis. She writes, "If we consider the various forms of violence linked to the practice of imprisonment, circuits of violence linked to one another, then we can begin to see that the extraordinary has some connection to the ordinary. What is routinely accepted as necessary conduct by prison guards can easily turn into the kind of torture that violates international standards, especially under the impact of racism." When someone sits, sips, and reflects over a cup of tea, there is a space to ask questions about one's relationship to the world. A world that is filled with dehumanization, war, and destruction. A world that is filled with moments of beauty, love, and resistance. The Remaking the Exceptional podcast examines that local and international implications of state violence while also uplifting acts of creative resistance.
If we can bounce to the next slide. Thank you. Through the voices of torture survivors and activists, we highlight the connections between policing and incarceration in Chicago and the human rights violations on the, quote, global war on terror, end quote. From this podcast, and for this podcast, Aaron and I worked with sound designer, incredible sound designer, Nate Sandberg, who collaged 8 individual interviews with Anthony Holmes, Mosem Beg, Kilroy Watkins, Ronnie Kitchen, Sabri Al-Karashi, Mansour Adaifi, as well as Tanya, Jenifor-Sublett, and Mohamedou Ould Slahi, who we are so grateful to have here today. The constellations of connections is so visible through their stories. The podcast invites you into an imagined conversation that never happened between Guantánamo torture survivors and Chicago police survivors. Today, we're fortunate to leave the imaginary and enter into the real wonder of us being in conversation together. Mohamedou, perhaps you first, and then Tanya, would you be so kind as to introduce yourselves to everyone who's listening today?
Thank you, Amber, and thank you, Aaron, Tan, and Needy, and thank everyone for organizing this beautiful event. For those who don't know me, my name is Mohamedou Slahi. I was born and raised in Mauritania. That's a small country in North Africa. I'm the first generation of my family to attend a modern school and to move away from Bedouin life and camel herding toward sedentary life and life in the city. After high school, I won a scholarship to Germany, and I studied information technology. And I went back to Mauritania, and after the horrific events of 9/11, I was kidnapped and disappeared. I was taken to different so-called black sites in Jordan, in Afghanistan, and I ended up in Guantánamo Bay. And I spent 15 years incarcerated and about 5 years under house arrest. Now I live and work in the Netherlands. I'm talking to you now from the city of Amsterdam. And I'm so happy to be part of this, and I'm so happy to be a free person. Freedom is much better than incarceration. And this is something, a privilege that only people who went through incarceration can understand.
Good afternoon, evening. My name is Tanya, Jenifor-Sublett. Everyone pretty much calls me Tan. I am one of the few women to come forward as a torture survivor of Chicago police. I was tortured at the age of 19, subsequently convicted under the theory of accountability of a crime. Although I was not there at the scene, and I actually went to the police station to turn in the perpetrator. I completed 21 years of prison. I was released October 4th, 2013. This coming Friday is the actual anniversary of my release. I have been home for 11 years. Yeah, and I'm currently the director of programs, community engagement, and supportive services for Chicago Torture Justice Center. We provide services specifically for individuals who have been abused by the police, tortured by the police, individuals who live in communities that are over policed, any state sanctioned violence. We provide services to individuals who are impacted by that violence. So thank you for having me.
Latanya, I know that that work is so important, and you're carving out time from a busy day where, as just before you got on, you know, something popped up and someone came in and they need to speak to you, and that work is vital and real, and so we're really grateful for your presence here today. And I wonder if you have any questions for each other. We talked, you know, earlier in preparation, and we all learned so much from you, from what you have to ask each other by way of introduction.
Now that Mohamedou has a question for me, and it was such a wonderful question. I would like to ask him the same question. My question to him is basically, how did he feel the first night that he was kidnapped, incarcerated? How did he make it through the time, really not knowing? And I think that's the difference between he and I. One of the only differences is that I had a set date that I knew that eventually I would get out of prison, although I fought hard to get out sooner than that. And that was not his experience. So I would love to hear, what was it like to just wake up every morning not knowing if you would ever be released? And once you were released, how did you feel?
Thank you so much, Dan, for this question. I just want to point out to those who don't know a lot about my story and that of Tan, that Tan was a victim of police violence and state violence in Chicago. And the person who led the torture team in Guantánamo Bay was a police lieutenant from Chicago by the name of Richard Zulli. He was so good in Chicago that they said that he needs to copy and take that beautiful experience, quote unquote, successful experience, to Guantanamo Bay and then to Iraq. So actually the violence began in the US, in the mainland, in Chicago. And this is so important because after 9/11, the US government narrative was that the bad guys are the Muslim, young Muslim are the bad guy. You don't need to worry, just need to, you know, to rubber stamp all the laws, you know, that infringe on freedom of speech, surveillance, etc., because they are not for you. They are for the bad guys. Give us the power to go after those bad guys. And the irony is that this all started in the mainland, in the US, where there are no bad guys. So, and this is so like almost like a fictitious story. that we are sitting here, we're talking, and the same apparatus that was responsible in Guantanamo Bay for horrendous war crime of torture. And I'm a survivor, but other detainees did not survive. And I want to give a shout out to Gur Rahman, who died in the cold room, and to Dali War, who was beaten to death in the same prison as I was in Guantanamo. Of course, I remember my first night in Guantanamo Bay. I didn't have any feeling because the punishment of the trip was such that I completely lost, connection with my body. My mind was floating over my body. And I was manhandled. And I was just been passing around to different people. We entered the room, they stripped me naked. They stripped everybody. They put us in the same room, all of us naked, looking at each other. And they showered us individually. They did a lot of tests. And I remember the shackles were almost about my weight. Maybe that is a little bit hyperbole, but they were so heavy and I couldn't carry them. This full shackle, body shackle. And they took me to a room. And because I wasn't aware of my surroundings, I was so kaput that I thought it was a cell, but it was not a cell, it was an interrogation room. And then I tried to explore the room. But when I stood up, I realized that I was bolted to the ground, that I couldn't move. And they spoke to me. They brought an interpreter because I didn't speak enough English to understand them. They took me to this room. And I remember the sound of the door. It was so heavy, and I can still hear it. And I can still hear, like when detainees were walking, from cell to cell in these very heavy chains. And I couldn't breathe because the cell didn't have windows. And there was only like a beanhole, very small beanhole, but they closed it in this metal cell. And I was so weak, I couldn't climb on the bed. And the bed was not very high, but I couldn't climb on it. So I just slept on the floor, very cold. And it was very dark. It was very lonely. It was very far away from home. I mean, literally and figuratively. And this was my first night. How about yours?
Thank you for sharing that. I remember first I was out on bond for almost 2 years. My family paid my bond. So I was going to court every month. And I remember every month I would go to court and I would just pray, please don't let them set a trial date, because I was never going to be ready for that. And when the judge would say a continuance to the next month, I would think, I'm free for another month. But I remember October 30th, 1992, when I was found guilty and they revoked my bond. I remember going back out of the courtroom. I took off all of my jewelry and everything. I gave it to my mom. And I still don't think it hit me. I still don't think it hit me that like I was literally going to Cook County Jail that night. I left my own house that day. And I remember when I closed my door, I prayed and I said, I prayed to be back here tonight. And I wasn't. I went to jail, Cook County Jail that night, and all my family left the courtroom. And I remember going into the bullpen, and when the door closed, I felt claustrophobic. And I didn't know I was claustrophobic until then, because I had been free. And I had what I didn't know then was a panic attack. Because I was like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta get out of here. And a young lady sat next to me and we just started to talk and it calmed me down. And she really said, like, what's a pretty girl like you doing here? And I just really told her everything. And she looked at me and she said, you know, you're about to do some time, right? And I said, time? Like I had no concept of what was about to happen to me. I was not ready to hear the sentence of 42 years. I was not ready for any of that. So in my head, I was like, no, things will change. This cannot be it. And I remember walking down this long corridor with this correctional officer. And I kept saying, well, you know, maybe I'm not going to get that much time. Maybe they'll see that I was in school, and maybe they'll see that I came from a good family, and maybe I'll see. And the officer was so very calm. And she said, none of that matters now. And it didn't matter that I came from a good family. It didn't matter that I was in college. None of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was the 20 to 60 years that I was going to be sentenced to. And I went through the process, the medical process of the worst pap smear ever, having to be strip searched in a bullpen with 30 other people, male officers peeping around the corner, can see that women are naked, being strip searched, all of that. And I finally made it upstairs to the actual women's jail, probably by 11 o'clock that night. And I will tell you, which is going to sound so crazy, I think I slept that night the best that I had slept in a year and a half because I didn't have to worry about it anymore. I knew that I was on to the next fight. I knew that I wasn't going to go to court another month and worry about if I was going to be free. I was no longer free. I woke up the next day like, how can I get out of this? But I remember sleeping that night. I really do. Because I was like, it's over. What's the next fight? That was October 30th, 1992. November 25th, the day before Thanksgiving, I was sentenced to 42 years in prison. 42 years. But it really, really wasn't until I got on that bus, December 2nd, 1992, and they drove me to prison. And I thought, I got to be here for 21 years? Surely there's a way to, surely I'm not going to be here 21 years. It all happened so quick because I was out on bond. So I was convicted, sentenced, transferred between October 30th and December 2nd. So those were 3 things that happened in a matter of weeks. So it seems like it was like one trauma after the other. I was convicted. I was sentenced. And I think I was just really, really dealing with how did a judge sentenced a 21-year-old woman, young woman, to 42 years. Like, I had never had a parking ticket. I had never been suspended from school. I was going to Harold Washington Junior College. Like, I kept thinking, what does it mean to not have a prior offense? I still got 42 years on a crime that I turned the perpetrator in and that I was not at the scene of. I was like, what kind of system is this? It wasn't until really later on that I began to really fight for my freedom that I kind of realized that sentencing a young woman, a 21-year-old woman, to 42 years was a genocide that I could not fully explain. You knew that I would never have children when you sentenced me. You knew that. So I thought of my sentencing as so malicious that it was not justice, it was punitive on so many different levels. So, yeah, thank you.
So I completely can relate to the feeling of like freedom inside yourself, because I know also inside myself that I wouldn't be kidnapped anymore. I wouldn't be so I was at the bottom, so there was nothing that could be done to me, and that was like, in a very macabre way, a good feeling inside. There is no kidnapping. There is no plane who is going to take you from Mauritania to Jordan, from Jordan to and the other point also, the like thinking about the time that you are going to spend. I remember one of the books that fell in my hand was about an Abbasid caliph who was incarcerated for 1 year. He was incarcerated for 1 year, and in prison he was a king. In prison he had like people who tended to him. When I read the story, I was so horrified, because that was like I think my second month. I was thinking, who can anyone survive a year in prison? And that was like, for me, so horrific to think about that you can spend 1 year in a prison. So, and little did I know that there was, much worse things in store for me. Because back then I did not know about the enhanced interrogation technique, i.e. Torture. And because in prison, they don't give you the memo before they do anything to you. It's always shock you. And I just want to tell Needy, Amber, and Aaron that they can cut us anytime they want. So did you have so did you spend time with other inmates, or were you alone, or what did you do during the day?
So yes, I spent time with other women. Initially, when I got to prison, everybody gets a job assignment. It's not the best job because you're new and they don't really know what to do with you. So you either go to the kitchen or the general store. And I went to the general store and we delivered all of the supplies to the prison. It was very hard labor. 50-pound boxes that, again, 21-year-old woman picking up a 50-pound box of chicken to deliver to the kitchen. Really backbreaking work. It was in March of 1993. I was able to start college and I went to school. I literally went to school the entire time of my incarceration. My mother told me they only have your body, let your mind be as free as it can be. And I took every educational program there was, everyone. If I took a break, it was just because I was tired of just being in school all the time. But initially, it started off with I had one roommate, and then I lived in a dorm with other women, but we were always basically together. I did go to segregation one time for something that they said was contraband, which was a teddy bear, believe it or not. Of all the things you could have in prison to cause harm, I had a teddy bear. And they took me to SEG for that. I did 9 days in SEG by myself, and only by myself because I was a non-smoker. So, they wouldn't put you in a room with somebody who smoked. So I had that experience while I was incarcerated. But yeah, it started off pretty rough. And I mean, no matter how good you try to make the circumstances in prison, it's prison. It's just prison. And no matter what you do and how you think you have your routine and how you think you can survive it, what you have to do to make it through every day, you're always going to have that person that comes to work who is free, who wears a uniform, who is going to tell you who you aren't, who you will never be. And they go home every day and live in our society, but they come to work to mistreat us. I just never understood why coming to work and telling people, that they'll never be nothing made their day. I'll never understand that. Never.
So what is college? Because I don't understand anything about the prison system. What is college? Do you go outside to a university or is it inside the prison?
I wish if we had went outside, I would have left the bus or something. No, they had at that time, Mohamedou, they really cared about us. Like when I say that, I use it loosely. They connected rehabilitation to education. So we had universities that would come inside of the prison. They were contracted to be inside of the prison, and there were vocational programs and there were degree programs. And you would get up every morning, and if you were in computer technology, you would go to the computer lab and stay there from 8:30 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, except for lunch. And you would learn everything that the curriculum, had on there. So we had maybe two or three different colleges that came in and taught courses.
I completely relate first. I relate to
go ahead, Mohamedou.
No, I just want to shortly say that I completely relate to the thirst for knowledge, because I wasn't allowed to take any course and I was begging them, like really begging them. And I told the commander, I told him, if you give me a choice to release me today and give me an access to college, I would choose access to college. So this is how important to me. And I just want shortly to understand, just do you have like a safe place in your head? What did you miss the most? What the thing that you said, I would do this the first time I go outside?
It's so many things. I mean, it was just so many things and they were so small. Like when I knew that I was getting ready to come home, it was so very important to me. The entire 21 years, you really only got to have one pillow. And I said to my mom, you know, she bought me this big, beautiful bed. And I said, I just have to have pillows, you know. And when I came home, like I literally, I would get out of my bed and step on pillows because it was so many pillows on my bed. And then I told my mom, I wanted to smell good, like, and I never wanted to wear white. Everything, we had to wear white t-shirts, white socks. And so my first like really couple months home, I was like the most colorful thing probably on earth. Like I mean there was, I don't know, the simplest thing I guess was my mom. I was really, I had lost my grandmother maybe 18 months before my 21-year sentence. Was finished. So it was very hard for me to go home, and my grandmother was not there. But I just really wanted to be with my mom. And simple things, very, very simple things, soap and deodorant and a pillow. And I wanted ice cream. And when I say like it was just so, I don't know, but I will tell you, Mohamedou, when my mom picked me up, she asked me, was I hungry? And I said, yes, I want pancakes. And my mom took me to breakfast. So I wanted pancakes before I could even get to my house. I had the biggest stack of pancakes that I had seen in 21 years. And as soon as I came home, I hadn't had a bath in 21 years. So I walked through the door at 12 o'clock in the afternoon at my mom's house where I paroled to, and I ran bath water. And I was literally in the bathtub from like 12 o'clock in the afternoon to like 4. I kept letting the water out and starting it again and letting the water out. And I did that like maybe every day. And then like at the end of the like next week, my mom brought me the water bill. And she was like, if you think you're gonna take baths for hours every day, you have to pay the water bill. So I stopped doing it because I didn't have money to pay the water bill.
So mine was two things. I wanted so much to see the sunset
Oh,
because 15 years I never saw the sunset or rise.
mm,
And the second thing, I wanted to walk and walk and walk and walk on the street without end because I hated the space that was so small, and you cannot do anything without the guard,
yeah,
watching you and telling you what to do. And this is now my habit that I just walk every day, like so much, because I just want, and I take always a street that is so long, has no end. I don't know whether I can ask you more questions because we don't want to take the
all the time. I do just want to
all the
say
time of
this.
Aaron and Amber. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I do just want to say, I think one of the differences is that for me, my torture was never acknowledged in prison. It was never spoken of, and your very existence in prison was based on um, them torture, the torture from the very beginning and continuing on in prison. And for me, it was like, oh, we don't torture people in the United States. That doesn't, oh no, that's for third world countries. You should not say that. So yeah, that's a big
Yes,
difference.
yes, but I completely understand. I live now in Europe, and when I was released, I was put on a blacklist and on all blacklists, and it was almost impossible to convince like a European country that you were put wrongfully on a blacklist because this is America. This is not Saudi Arabia. It's not Iran. It's not an African country. You know, I uh, I uh, I need to medical treatment after my release, and I applied for because I had friends in Germany, and they said that they want to help me, and they invited me. So when I went to the embassy, they had a doctor who interviewed me to see my situation. So and I had my medical file. He could like check. And then he told me, you know what he told me? It's very shocking. He told me, you call it freedom fighters in Palestine. Some people call it terrorism, and Americans are professionals. He was a doctor. And I was like looking at him in amazement after a very long lecture. You know what I told him? Nothing. I just took my file and left. And because he was a very good character, because he gave me a lot of material to write about. And I was so thankful. I didn't get any visa though. So I just, the image of the United States of America as a democracy, as a country that cares about the rule of law, people really who are not from the US or who never got the attention of the security apparatus of the United States of America, they really don't know this. And it will take, I think, some time for people to realize this is not a democracy, this is a hegemony. And it's very sad because I love Americans and I think they're decent people, they deserve better.
Well, I'm gonna jump in and circle around a little bit. And I just want to acknowledge some things that were said. You brought up these blacklists, Mohamedou, and it just reminds me of the gang databases here in Chicago. There's this kind of idea of, targeting these, the idea of dehumanizing individuals as the worst of the worst, or terrorists or super predators. It's these frames that continually get utilized, and the intersections that you guys have continually brought up through your storytelling. And one thing that just hit home today for me, Mohamedou, is when you said, you ended up in your cell and that you couldn't breathe. And it immediately reminded me of Broadway. Michael Broadway just passed away at Stateville Prison this summer. He was a part of Prison Neighborhood Arts Education Project. He was a part of many other scholarly projects at Stateville Prison. And he basically suffocated to death without support, getting any help from the guards, because he was on the top floor on a very, very hot day and they didn't want to go up into the heat. And so I feel like there's just like such a, and that reminds me of what Mohamedou said about his time and about him literally saying that he couldn't breathe when he was being beaten in an Air Force base in Bagram, to George Floyd. And so these intersections, I think, are really powerful. And I just want to acknowledge that, especially since so many people in the community here knew Michael. Circling around, you mentioned sunsets. You talked about pillows. The setting of the first episode of the podcast is, as the podcast titled "Tea, Tenderness, and Torture" is the first episode, is inside Badr Ahmed's drawing of a table set for tea with no one there. Badr made those paintings inside Guantánamo, where he's still actually legally imprisoned. And he said he made those drawings of tea parties with no attendees because he'd like to imagine his friends and family being there. And, we compiled the podcast with that in mind, with bringing this imagined gathering together. And I was wondering if you guys could both speak a little bit about, what role tea has played in your life, and how has that functioned as a space and as how has it functioned in your lives? Latanya, if you want to start.
I love tea. Tea reminds me of my grandmother. I started drinking tea with my grandmother as a very young girl. And when I think about most of the times that I drank tea during my incarceration, it was very limited. We had a variety box that we could buy. But I still drank tea during my incarceration. Once I was released, tea has become for me something that I look to for calmness. It reminds me of very, very good times as far as just being with my grandmother, um, drinking, having access to tea when I was incarcerated. We would make our own little concoctions. If people weren't feeling well, we would make each other tea. And that makes me feel good to know that we took care of each other. Nobody ever came to somebody's door and said, I don't feel good. I need a cup of hot chocolate. People would come to the door and say, I don't feel good. Do you have some tea? And now that I am free, I think that I'm a tea connoisseur. I drink loose tea now. So I'm big time in with the tea. Like I have two kinds of coffee at my house, like regular and decaf, and I probably have like 20 kinds of tea. So tea plays a very, very big role in my life. And I look to it for calmness. I look to it for healing. Just, I don't know. Um, it, yeah, it's a lot. It's heavy. It has a heavy presence in my life. I will not pretend that it was as significant. When I look at this painting, I'm thinking about the thought of someone painting this, drawing this, and nobody's there to have tea. I don't think you should have tea without people. And that makes me sad to think that, a place was set and it was empty. But yeah, that's such a loaded question. And I really don't even know how to fully answer that.
So, about 2 weeks ago, I went to Brussels to visit my nephew, and he was asking me what I need to see, and because he want to take me around. I told him to take me to the place where I can buy good tea. That's actually what I told him, because whenever I go to a city, I look for tea, and when I have now here at home, I have tea from Paris, tea from the southern France, tea from Amsterdam, and tea from England, and tea from Japan. My Japanese friend brought me tea. I grew up in a culture where tea is very important. Tea is not just a beverage. Tea means warmth. Tea means getting together. Tea means comfort, safety, and secure environment where you have the family, where you have your friends, and safe environment where people could share the stories, where people would share the poems, even about tea. And the most senior person in the family is the one who makes tea. And he's the very last one to drink the cup because he has to serve everybody. And my interrogator in my first black site in Jordan, they knew how important tea to me, and they seduced me. They said I was very scared, very afraid. I was shaking, and then they decided to give me a cup of tea. When I took the first sip, my whole body was so warm, and I felt so good, like nirvana. I mean, that would be my nirvana. That cup of tea was my nirvana. And he started asking me questions. And I felt so guilty and ashamed because I did not know the answer to his question. He was putting forward some picture of guys that America was looking for, but I did not know them. But I already drank his tea. And I felt really how much treason I have committed, against the gentleman who offered me a cup of tea. And just to close my remarks, we always, need to remember that American Revolution was because of tea. I think the English put a lot of taxes that a lot of people couldn't afford to drink tea. And one of the things, but Americans actually forgot about this, and tea is not really that important in many circles in the US. And I did convert, I think, every single guard who guarded me, I converted them when I offered them tea. And they started drinking tea. And every time they come to me, they would say, pillow. By the way, Tan, they call me pillow. And I don't know why we have this relationship with pillows, but I think because of comfort. Because you don't have anyone to hug. You don't have anyone to be with you in bed. So you have a pillow, and the pillow is like, we personify the pillow. And me too, I have a lot of pillows here. So just to let you know.
Mohamedou, we have compiled this book of 48 tea recipes, and the one for Mauritania is your incredible mint tea recipe. And I make it very often. And in fact, I've started growing tea so that I can do it properly. I just wanted you to know that. And I appreciate this
I'm happy I converted you.
And I really
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
I really appreciate this conversation about the complexity of tea and these bonds that it makes. Latanya speaking about, comfort that you can provide for another person is maybe one side of it, and forming these connections where we help one another. And Mohamedou, the other being this sense of responsibility for suddenly being in relationship, right? Where someone has offered you this and it's a gift, and a gift comes with a certain set of obligations. And that makes me think about what connections each of you see between your struggles and your vision for peace and justice, because the same tea holds these same, like, very extreme poles in its history of comfort and like radical policing around land and trade and transport. It's not a simple material with an easy history. And some of the first labor rights, for example, came from protesting land practices on early tea plantations. So the exact relationships that you're discussing are embedded in this material. So just to repeat this question, and Mohamedou, maybe we'll start with you this time. What do you see as connections between, your struggles as well as with reconciliation, reparations, etc.?
Funny you said that, because before even I met you, I wrote in my book, and I think I wrote these notes in the prison, and I handed it to my lawyer, and it made it to the book. I don't know where, but I said that I'm inviting my girls to drink tea with me, because tea is a sign of peace and reconciliation, because it's like your drink buddy, but without getting drunk, you know? And so drink, if someone sit with you, this is, and drink tea with you, that's a friendship, that's reconciliation. There is no need to talk about anything anymore. And I think it's very hard to kill a Palestinian if you visit a Palestinian in their home, if you drink tea with them. They have very special tea. It's very hard to hate a Jewish person if they invite you to a kosher meal and you drink their tea. It's just not, you cannot force yourself to hate anyone if you know them, if you sit with them, if you drink tea with them, if you share a meal with them. And I personally found strength and power in forgiveness, because I couldn't wait on people to come to me and, you know, give me a tap on the back. You know, I couldn't. I need to survive, and I decided to forgive. And actually, I ended up doing exactly that, because some of the guards came to me and we drink tea together, you know, and I have photos, they made even film about it. This like idea that was born in myself was a reality, and it brought like the best kind of reconciliation you could ever imagine, sitting together and talking together, and, you know, completely renouncing any kind of violence.
Latanya, what connections do you see between your struggles as well as your visions for peace and justice through this conversation, and maybe through the material of tea, maybe not?
I think the connections, are that we're finally in a season where people are willing to hear a little bit more than what they have been in the past. Unfortunately, it has been many, many events and murders for all of us to see. But I think it was really something about the murder of George Floyd that opened up a lot of conversations and a lot of ears. So the connection for those of us who have been fighting, who have been wanting to be heard, we have the ear now. The struggle is to get them to sit down with us and have that tea. And that we share more in common than people think. There's always the different sides, or you're just as impacted, or you know, you've been to prison, and I've never. But our common goal is that we don't want to keep seeing what we have been seeing. So the struggle is we are connected by the worst things ever. We will always be connected by those things. The struggle is for people to understand that you don't have to have been incarcerated. You don't have to have, you know, have all of the experiences of torture and abuse and all of those things for us to sit down and create the world that we want to live in.
Thank you, Latanya. If we could go to the next slide. The setting for the second episode, I feel like this ties into exactly what you all are talking about, which is called Maps, Memory, and Violence, is inside Khalid Qasim's painting of a robust fire burning below a white box attached to a completely black wall. Khalid made this painting in Guantánamo, where he still is held. And we learn that this high contrast piece is documentation of his torture of temperature extremes, fire, and the frigid winds of an air conditioner. And, you know, with that in mind, and with both of your experiences with the failures of local and international laws, what are your visions for peace and abolition? You know, abolition of war, of torture, of prisons, of state violence. What are your visions of peace and justice? Mohamedou?
First, I just want to comment to this beautiful painting. It reminded me of an Arabic poem that I memorized when I was young. I'm trying to say the words in English, but it plays in Arabic in my head. Prison is hell, and prison is heaven. I am the subject of both. Me, my memories, and the darkness, the bitter darkness, and waiting. Those are the people who are in this cell. Day has come to the world, and the sun rose over the universe, but the sun never rose over me. And it went so on and so forth. I think at one day in history, slavery was a very normal thing. People owned other human beings, and they worked them literally to death, and the society accepted that. I think there will be a day, I hope sooner than later, where we look at war and conflict and this punitive incarceration system as we look now at slavery. Because everyone now is abolitionist. It's very easy to look back at things and say this is bad, but we need to look at this when other people wouldn't look at them as just like we look now at slavery.
Mm-hmm.
My vision, I don't know, I think my vision for abolition against war and torture in the carceral state has to do with all of us creating it. I don't think that we can sit back and wait for someone to make that decision. I think people have to be uncomfortable, and we have created a world where people seek comfort. People say, "Oh, as long as it doesn't impact what I am doing," but it does. War impacts everything war impacts the bananas that you pick in the grocery store. So until we become informed about how all of this impacts every part of our lives, and we say no more, my vision is for all of us to become so informed that we tell the powers that be what we will stand for and what we will not. They don't get to make top-down decisions. So when I think about abolition and when I think about war, we need to be able to say, this impacts our life at the grocery store. I no longer buy a certain banana because it's funding. We're not going to do it anymore. But we have to accept that. So my vision is information and acceptance. We have to become informed and we have to accept how long we have been allowing. We have to, just like Mohamedou said, we have to look at everything that is going on now the way that one day somebody woke up and said, this should not happen again. It should not be happening now. It should not just be on the news that people are dying for no reason. It is unacceptable. How do we support that? How do we allow companies and corporations to fund mass murder and genocide? We have to become a society that says, I will not purchase that. I will not contribute to that. We have to stop it. So my vision is that we become uncomfortable instead of just watching the TV and saying, oh, that's really, really so sad. And then we go to our big box store and buy what's funding what we say shouldn't happen. Do you know how many companies use prisoners for call centers? Yeah. And you call those call centers, and those are prisoners taking your order. Yeah, we need more time. We need more time than this.
I feel like that resonates so powerfully with what we're going to show with the next slide is the Ode to the Sea installation. And, you know, this isn't in our notes, but the sail that we constructed was made out of military uniforms made by Unicor. And Unicor is a prison industries, and they make all of their stuff inside U.S. prisons. And it's also the uniforms that were worn by the military in Guantánamo. And so there's, once again, these overlapping histories and connections, and, you know, all the way down to those companies that you're talking about, Tanya. Ambro, I'm sorry to jump in.
Yeah, no, you took the words literally right out of my mouth. That this segue of the way in which, you know, the prisons and military are in our everyday lives. I mean, we use tea as a metaphor, but it's really a metaphor for, as you say, sort of everything and every material in our lives. So the setting for episode 4 is ships, contradictions, and confinement. And it's inside one of Sabri al-Qarashi's beautiful paintings of a ship in the middle of a chaotic storm. And there were many paintings, thank you, for this is Ghalib al-Bahani's ship that is in the exhibition that is currently up. And this is a quote from Sabri. At Guantanamo, depending on the place where I was, in different camps or blocks, I could see and smell and hear the sea. And for me, the sea was a symbol of freedom. And, you know, when Aaron and I had the incredible opportunity to look at many of the works made inside Guantanamo, we noticed that there were many ships painted on an open sea. And it brought to mind, for me, Christina Sharp's book, In the Wake, on Blackness and Being. And she writes about what she calls wake work. She uses the metaphor of the wake to practice holding the kinds of contradictions that we're discussing today. The wake of a ship is a force that spreads out behind the ship. People in mourning are awake around a body at the wake, and awake, the state of being awake, which also includes our joys and our celebrations together. And can you speak about the way that water and hearing the ocean and the sea crashing against the shore in Cuba, which Mohamedou, to my understanding, you were never really able to see, and Latanya, the colors and the sunrises we've talked about over Lake Michigan, the swirling reds, which does evoke the infusion of a cup of tea. Can you talk about the metaphor of water as a space to reflect on the contradictions while also imagining freedom?
And before Tan and Mohamedou answer that question, I want to remind the audience that we're approaching the end of our time together. So if you do have a question for the speakers, remember to drop it in the chat. Thanks.
Latanya, you want to lead us in this question of water?
I would say I did an interview a couple years ago for the Chicago Torture Justice Memorial. They were asking torture survivors where they thought the memorial should go. And I said on Lake Michigan. And the interviewer was very surprised. If anybody has, anyone in the audience who lives here or who has been to Chicago, Lake Michigan, it is absolutely beautiful. And she asked, like, why would you say Lake Michigan? I said, because for me, when I look out onto Lake Michigan and I see the water and there is no end to it, it always reminds me that there is no end to this fight. And I wanted the memorial to be there in the midst of all of the beauty to remind people that there was ugliness that took people's lives, and that our city doesn't get to exist without acknowledging it. So every time you drive past this beautiful Lake Michigan, let it be known that it was corrupted and that it took freedom and life from people. And as you look onto the water, remember there is no end to this fight. As far as you can see, that's how long we have to fight for freedom, justice, and equity. Always. I have spent plenty of mornings on the lake by myself, drinking coffee, though, thinking about this fight. And every time I see its beauty, I still think, what a beautiful thing I have in this fight. To be in it, because I cried to be free, to see it, to be in it. So when I see Lake Michigan, and I've seen, ocean or two with some traveling, I still think the same thing. Waking up, looking at the Atlantic Ocean and thinking, it's water everywhere. And as long as I see water and I can't see the end, I am going to fight. Always. As long as I can see the sunrise, it gives me another day. And the sunset gives me the rest to fight the next day.
I remember the first time I saw water, I was about 12 years of age. And after school, some of my friends told me that if I saw the beach. I don't know how the conversation went, but we ended up going to the beach for the first time. And it was looking toward Guantánamo Bay. Actually, the only water separated me then from Guantánamo Bay. Little did I know that I would end up one day crossing this body of water and ending up on the other side. It was the first time I was very scared because of the violence of the waves. And the first time I saw the sky touching water, because I always thought that Earth is flat and there is no touching anywhere. But for the first time, I saw actually sky touching water. It was humongous. It was like completely life-changing. Water means life, but it could also mean violence. This nurture that no one can live without is also used as a means of oppression, a tool of oppression. General Bonaparte was put in, I think, the island of Helena. And we were put in this island, so the water was a weapon, was used as a weapon, you know, to dissuade anyone, because no one can cross the water. So it's amazing that water is so contradictory. It's life, but always is very powerful tool of the oppressor.
Well, I feel like that's a great reflection for everything we've been talking about, from water to tea. I feel like we're starting to run short on time. We did get a question in the chat, and I also want to close out to see if before we do thank yous and things, if you all had questions you want to ask one another, you know, returning to this space of seeing if you had any at this moment questions and follow-ups for one another, or for Amber and I, or for the audience as well, that you would like to ask. And since this will kind of be our last go around, I'm also gonna just note that Juliana writes in the chat, what were the hardest things about coming out of prison, and what were the easiest? So, you know, any other questions you'd like to share with one another, questions you have for us or for the audience, and this question about the hardest and easiest things. Well, Tanya, I'm gonna pass it to you just to keep it in the same circle. I know that didn't give you a lot of time. Sorry.
So the easiest thing was just being grateful because of everything that I had experienced. I was literally very grateful to even stand in line in the grocery store. People would be standing in front of me like, oh, they need another person here. And I'd be like, dude, I'm in the grocery store. You know, I was just very, very grateful for every experience. Like, there was not a day that something happened and I wasn't like, okay, but I could have been incarcerated. So I'm grateful. I think the hardest thing coming home was, for me, thought that everybody knew that I had been incarcerated. People I had never seen before. I thought that they could look at me and tell, even though I had on regular clothing, my hair was regular, I was functioning. I just thought that when people looked at me, they could see incarceration on me. So it was like I had this scarlet letter of prison on me. And I was very self-conscious of it. Like, why are they looking at me? That's because they know I just got out of prison. I don't know what made me really think that. Another hard thing was, every time I tried to apply for any type of state assistance to just help me out. Like, once you said that you had been to prison, people wanted to hear your whole story. And you're like, why do like either you're going to help me or you're not? But you would have to tell the whole story. And then people would say, you know what? I feel so bad that that happened to you. And because of that, I'm going to sign off on and you'd be like, you really were supposed to sign off on it anyway. Why did I have to tell you everything? So it created for me the thought that you have to qualify your pain. And we still do that. We make everybody in society label themselves as something in order to receive services. And then there's a cycle of it. One year it's the veterans, the next year it's for homeless youth, the next year it's in domestic violence. The catchphrase is reentry now. So we make people qualify to receive the very things that we pay taxes for.
Mhm.
We make people call themselves something. I'm alcoholic. I'm a domestic violence survivor. I'm formerly incarcerated. I'm something. And they go, oh, because you're this, I can make sure you get this. What about I'm freaking human and I need help? What about? What about that? We're in America. I need help. So that is something with the program that I run here at Chicago Torture Justice Center. I don't really want to hear it. When people say to me, I just got out, and I go, I mean, if you want to tell me, you can. But we have resources for people just because you've been to prison. I don't care why. I don't care how much time you've done. You don't have to tell me your race. You don't have to tell me your religion. You don't have to tell me your preferences. I just want to help you. And if we were a society that did that overall, because that's what justice really is. We have so subscribed to this manufactured definition of what justice is. Justice is equity. Justice is fairness. Justice is being able to make sure that everything is when people leave the courtroom and they come out and say, oh, they were convicted, justice was served. Was it really? Because now you have sent someone somewhere that they don't even care about them. They're going to victimize and traumatize this person for 30 years. Is that justice in this land of the free, home of the brave? So the hardest thing was always having to qualify myself based on something. I never got any services just because I was human. I got them because I was a Black woman, come from a marginalized community, and they say that's equity. It is not. It is you putting me still in a statistical data of, oh, we gave so-and-so this. That was hard for me to have to tell my story and wait for people to approve me based on their level of empathy. Horrible.
Mhm.
But don't get me started.
Mohamedou, you want to close us out?
I mean, you guys like said everything, and this is just beautiful, and I'm happy to be alive, and I'm so grateful for people like you, because without people like you, I wouldn't be a free person. So for that, I feel deeply indebted and grateful.
As we close out, I just want to say we met you virtually, I think 3 years ago now, when we were doing these interviews for this imagined conversation. And now we've had a few opportunities to go from imagination to the real space of us talking together. And I'm so grateful, and I learn gratitude always from both of you, to continue to be in relationship and to continue to have these conversations and to continue to learn from you.
Yeah, big thank you to Latanya, to Mohamedou for sharing with us today. I also just want to give a shout out to our friends that joined us. I saw Monica Cosby was there. Eric Perez was on for a bit. Additional thanks to the Remaking the Exceptional podcast contributors, Anthony Holmes, Mozambique, Kilroy Watkins, Ronnie Kitchen, Sabri Al-Karashi, Mansour Daifi for sharing their stories. Also want to give a shout out to the audio editor and our audio and editor designer, Nate Sandberg. We also want to thank Ode to the Sea contributors, Halit Kasim, Galip Al-Bahani, and Muath Al-Awi. An additional thank you to the Visualizing Abolition team at UCSC, the Institute of Arts and Sciences, the Barrios Unidos at Santa Cruz, and the San Jose Museum of Art for including the Tea Project and Seeing Through Stone exhibition. And special thanks to Nidhi, to Tatiana, to Luis, to the curator Lauren and Rachel. And finally, we are so grateful to San Jose State University radio station 90.5 for airing Remaking the Exceptional, and we hope you all get to check it out. If you haven't, you can listen to it at tproject.org, t-project.org. Thank you all.
Thank you to all our speakers for coming tonight. And just one more reminder that the exhibition Seeing Through Stone, if you're in California or visiting Northern California, is on view at SJMA, at Barrios Unidos, and at the Institute of Arts and Sciences until January 5th. This program was presented in conjunction with the exhibition Seeing Through Stone as part of the Visualizing Abolition initiative. Thank you everyone for joining us and have a wonderful Wednesday.
Thanks, everybody.